Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Avi Havivi's weekly Siddur class.
We've been talking, we're in this long course, and I looked at our stats. We have someone listening in Australia, we have someone listening in Italy, Germany. So hello Australia, hello Italy, hello Germany, and Spain. We used to have someone from China, but they've seemed to have fallen off. I don't know what happened to the person in China. So starting the last week in April 2023, this has been a class in Jewish theologies, Jewish ideas about God specifically, by way of having a look at different ideas about God so that we can all digest those and figure out what our own ideas about God are as we go through our davening. I asked Larry to remind me about something, and he did. So last week we talked about reward and punishment. So we talked about the classic rabbinic ideas of reward and punishment, which were, not surprisingly, probably fairly familiar to you. And Larry wanted to talk more about, why that doesn't necessarily work. So that's not what I'm going to talk about today, because we'll talk about that when we get to modern theology. But I do want to talk about the concept of a crash. So, we talked about how, in the Bible, it generally says that, if you do good, you'll be rewarded. If you do bad, you'll be punished. Originally, that's for several generations. The prophet Ezekiel, around the time of the destruction of the first temple, the early 500s BCE, says, no, it's going to be every individual and it's going to be based on your deeds. And then, of course, the book of Job questions that. Job says, I didn't do anything so bad to deserve all the bad things that have happened to me. And then the sages, the period that we're talking about, or at least their forerunners, the Pharisees, solved that problem by saying, well, there's another life, there's an afterlife where everything's going to get all reconciled. And we're going to look at ideas about the afterlife today. And so each one of these is sort of a successive adjustment, let's say that, an adjustment in theology in response to a sense that the previous theology simply doesn't work anymore. Okay? The same way, people say, post the Holocaust, how can we believe in God, as some people say, right? The theology that I had before doesn't work anymore. So there is a yeshiva in Chicago called Svara, S-V-A-R-A, Svara, which is Aramaic for reasoning, okay, which defines itself as a queer yeshiva. I urge everyone to look at them online. They have some really interesting things. And they teach people Talmud. And the Rosh Yeshiva, the founder of that, her name is B'nai Lappi. She is a rabbi who graduated from JTS. And her intro talk that she always gives, her Svara intro talk, says that basically, and this is kind of how she explains as a basis of queer people trying to come to grips with the Jewish tradition, the rabbinic tradition, which is obviously, heteronormative, binary. So she says there's a theology, and the theology works until something happens that shows that it doesn't work. And she refers to that as a crash. It's a better phrase than crash. It's crash something. I can't remember. I wish I could remember. Too early in the morning. And she says that in the wake of a crash, people say, you're right, that system doesn't work, and then they reformulate their system. So as Larry pointed out last week, this is analogous to what happens in physics, the rules of physics, which seem to be the rules, or, astronomy, whatever, how the universe works, until there's new data, and there's new data can get to a point where people say, no, actually that old system doesn't work, doesn't explain things well enough, isn't true with a capital T, and then a new hypothesis is formulated to incorporate the new data. So there's new data all the time, right? At a certain point, there gets to be an accumulation and type of new data that we say the system doesn't work anymore, can't be true, and they reformulate a new system. So as Larry pointed out last week, that happens in physics, it happens in astronomy, and it happens in theology also. So you could say, the destruction of the first temple is a crash, right? Because people said the temple will protect us. God would never allow God's house to be destroyed. That was their operant theology. And then God allowed God's house to be destroyed. So crash theory, that's what she calls it. Sorry, Rabbi Lappy, crash theory, right? So crash theory says that system doesn't work. New system needs to be formulated. And that has to do with, we sinned because we worshiped other gods. And that's why God allowed God's temple to be destroyed. And then the second temple is destroyed. That's another crash, right? And rabbinic Judaism is born out of that. And she basically says in contemporary times, modernity, this is yet another crash, right? So let's just say, she would say the heteronormative binary version of Judaism doesn't work anymore nowadays in an era in which a lot of people consider themselves not heteronormative or not binary. And so she works with Savara's yeshiva on queer readings of Talmud. That's all I'm going to say about that. But I told you all of that because I wanted to use her phrase, I think it's called crash theory or crash Torah, right? So in modernity, we might say some of these ideas about reward and punishment crash, which is a fancy way of saying a lot of us don't buy it anymore. Some of us do, okay? So again, we talked about, what percentage of Jews do we think still believe in an afterlife where the good people are rewarded and the bad people are punished? And our non-scientific answer was, maybe 30 to 40% of Jews on the planet today. Okay. And I bet might even be more than that. All right. So we're going to finish up with rabbinic theology. We talked about reward and punishment last week and looked at passages about that. And we said that reward and punishment will take place, if not in this life, in the afterlife. And today we're actually going to look at the sages' ideas about what the afterlife was like. That's what we're going to look at. This is dedicated to Bernie, who said they always taught him that Jews do not have any idea of the afterlife. And now I will show you that that is a misconception, okay, that the Mishnah and Talmud are full of ideas about the afterlife. All right, without further ado, ready? That's where we're at. And this will be our last unit in rabbinic theology. And again, we're not studying this because I think you should believe it or you shouldn't believe it, but I'm doing honor and trying to teach this with integrity. This is actually an incredibly important and pretty well accepted concept in classic theology of the Talmudic sages, and we should study it. So let's start not with the sages, but with Josephus, who claimed that he was a Pharisee. Josephus, Jewish historian who wrote in Greek for Romans after the destruction of the temple. So in the last few centuries of the first century, last few decades of the first century of the Common Era, Josephus talks about the sects, S-E-C-T-S, in Judaism. He talks about he talks about the Essenes, the Pharisees, and the Sadducees and what they believe. The Pharisees, same Pharisees as in the New Testament, and these are the ancestors of Chazal, of our sages. They're the forerunners of the sages of the Mishnah and Talmud. Okay. As to the other two orders at first mentioned, the Pharisees, blah, 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 and then the Sadducees, blah, blah, blah. I have bolded the text. That is the punchline. The Pharisees say that all souls are incorruptible. Incorruptible is a fancy word meaning can't be destroyed. That there is an essence of a person, the soul, which is not destroyed, meaning the body, of course, withers away and decays, but the soul does not. And the souls of good men only are removed into other bodies. They go on into other bodies. That's complicated. We're not going to talk about reincarnation in the rabbinic part. We'll talk about that when we get to Kabbalah. And the souls of bad men are subject to eternal punishment. So something, let's call it perpetual, happens to souls of good people, and souls of bad people are punished. The Sadducees, we think they are the last of the Jerusalem priests, the sort of power center in Jerusalem around the time of the destruction of the temple. They suppose that God is not concerned in our doing or not doing what is evil, and they take away the belief of the immortal duration of the soul and punishments and rewards in Hades. Those Sadducees, they don't believe in the afterlife. Pharisees believe that something happens to the soul after this life. Okay? Now we're going to take a look at the heirs of the Pharisees, our sages of blessed memory, Chazal, the rabbis of the Mishnah and Talmud, and say what they say about the afterlife. I'm not going to have too much about Hades because they have great, bizarre, terrible, Baroque descriptions of what happens in hell. So I'm only going to give you a little taste of hell because if I gave you more, it's just like too much to tolerate on a Tuesday morning. So Pirkei Avot, Rabbi Elazar HaKapar used to say that Hayilodim lamut v'hametim lahayot v'chayim ladon. Everyone who's born is going to die. Everyone who's going to die is going to be resuscitated, reanimated, and when they are brought to life, they will be judged. There is a judgment, okay? And again, the bolding is by me in this section. Don't think your Yetzer Hara might think that, oh, we just go down to Sheol, to the underworld, and that will save me. Meaning, don't think, oh, I did wicked deeds. I didn't get punished. That's okay. I'm just going to die and it's all going to be over. Don't think that, okay? Because you have no choice. You were created without choice. You're born without choice. You live without choice. You die without choice. And you will have to render judgment. And against your will, you will give an account and reckoning before the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He. Okay? So the soul will be reanimated and there will be judgment. And therefore, as a sort of corollary, Rabbi Yaakov says, also in Pirkei Avot, chapter 4, paragraph 16 to 17, this world is just like a vestibule in front of Olam Haba. That is the rabbinic term, the world to come. There's another world after this world. It's called Olam Haba. I said last week, I'll say it again, that there are contemporary rabbis who want to de-emphasize the rabbinic idea of an actual afterlife, and they tend to translate Olam Haba as the world that is coming, meaning we're all building for some future world that is coming that may not exist in our lifetime. And this is definitely not pshat, definitely not what the sages meant when they said Olam Haba, but it is a legitimate translation of the Hebrew, meaning, yeah, you could say Olam Haba means the world that is coming rather than the world to come. It could mean that. It's not what the sages meant, okay? So this world is just like a vestibule. Vestibule, what's a vestibule? It's like, the front hallway when you come into someone's house and you might, make sure you come into the dinner party. You're in the front hallway. Most of us would probably do this outside the front door. You make sure your shirt is tucked in properly. If there's a mirror just inside the door of the house, as there in some houses in the front hallway, the vestibule, you look at your hair, you look at your lipstick. Okay, you want to make sure you look right to come to the dinner party. So, hatkein atzmecha baprosdor, kadesh tikanes latraklim. Okay? Make sure you are all prepared in the vestibule so that you can come into the banqueting hall. All right? And he talks about this world and the next world. So again, there's a world to come after this world. And here's one idea about it from the sage Rav, first generation of Babylonian Amoraim around the year 250 of the Common Era, 250-ish. Okay? Rav used to say, by the way, literally in Aramaic, Margilah befume de Rav, a pearl in his mouth, which is taken to mean this is the kind of thing he would say over and over again to people. He'd always, whenever Rav bumped into someone, this is what he would say. Okay? Lo ba'olam hazeh ha'olam haba. The world to come is not like this world. Ha'olam haba ein bo lo achila velo shtiya. In the world to come, in the afterlife, there is no eating or drinking. There is no sex, no business, no kin'ah or sinah or taharut, no envy or hatred or competition. So everything that we're used to as sort of social existence in this world does not exist in the world to come, the afterlife. What happens there? Tzadikim yoshvim va'atrotehem berashehem. The righteous are there with their crowns upon their heads, okay? And they are enjoying God's presence. So what are the righteous doing in the afterlife, which in other places might be called Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden? I don't think I brought any passages where it's called the Garden of Eden, but it's sometimes called Paradise, Pardes, sometimes called the Garden of Eden, called Olam Haba. This is seen as the afterlife for those who were righteous in this life. So there's no physical existence, but rather the righteous are just sitting with crowns on their head. Elsewhere it says they're sitting and they're studying Torah. And what else are they doing? In Babylonian Talmud, Bava Batra 75a, Rabbah says that Rabbi Yochanan says, what's going to happen in that afterlife? This contradicts the other one, okay? Rabbinic theology, there is food, all right? Rabbinic theology is not internally consistent. Midrash is not internally consistent. It's not philosophy. So sometimes things contradict each other. So there will be food, says Rabbi Yochanan. There will be a feast. And what is the feast going to be? The flesh of Leviathan, Leviathan. And then there's a proof text about that. It basically says God slaughters, remember God made the great sea monsters on the, I guess, 5th day of creation or 6th day, I don't remember. And then there's a midrash that says if they would have procreated like other creatures, they would have destroyed the whole world. So God slaughtered one of them, right? And salted it away, made, salted meat, preserved meat, saving it for the righteous to eat as their banquet in the world to come. And who remembers this? And what will happen to the skin of Leviathan? What's it going to be used for? Someone unmute and shout it out, because you might have said this prayer and not known where it comes from. The skin of Leviathan is going to be the covering of your Sukkah. So for those who follow a traditional Siddur on the last day of Sukkot, or on Shmini Atzeret, or on Simchat Torah, the different versions of when you do this, probably on Shmini Atzeret, your last meal in the Sukkah, after your last meal in the Sukkah, you say, Yehi ratzon milfanecha, may it be your will, O God, God of our ancestors, that next year we may merit to sit in the Sukkah made from the skin of Leviathan. Why do we say that? Because that's another way of saying that we want the Mashiach to come. We hope that next year we are in Olam Haba, not because we just plain old died, but because the Mashiach came and brought Olam Haba. So that's where that prayer is based on this midrash. So there's going to be a feast of eating Leviathan meat, again, whale or dragon or sea dragon. I don't know what the vegetarians are going to eat. And the sukkah covering is going to be made from the skin. Okay. Who's going to be in Olam Haba? Mishnah Sanhedrin 10:1. Kol Yisrael yesh lahem chelek Olam Haba. All Jews are going to be in the world to come. This might surprise you. You would think, what about the wicked ones? Do they get to come? So the explanatory thing that's given in English here, which is put in with the translator from Sepharia, even sinners and those who are liable to death penalty in this life, let's say they were murderers, they will go to Olam Haba. They all have a share, okay? Because it says, important in Isaiah chapter 60, Ve'amech kulam tzadikim le'olam yirshu eretz. Your people, they are all righteous, and they will inherit the land le'olam, forever, which is interpreted to mean your people being the Jews. Everyone will go to Olam Haba, and they will all inherit that future world, okay? Except for, and again, we're studying this for the sake of studying it. Who doesn't get to go to Olam Haba? And there are various lists after this Mishnah and in Pirkei Avot, whole lists of, and in the Talmud, various categories of people who don't get to go to Olam Haba. We're just going to look at the first list. One who says there is no resurrection of the dead based on the Torah. One who says the Torah does not say that there is resurrection of the dead. One who says Torah does not come from heaven. And not be chorus, some sort of heretic. It doesn't explain what that is exactly. Okay. Rabbi Akiva says, one who reads external literature, meaning books that are thought to be sacred that are not sacred to the Jews, and one who practices magic. Okay. Abba Shaul says also one who pronounces the 4-letter name of God, right? because who's supposed to pronounce the four-letter name of God correctly? Only the high priest in the temple on Yom HaKippurim. All right, so everyone gets to go to the world to come, except for the following categories of people who are seen to be as theological heretics of some extreme sort, according to this myth. Okay. Well, how do wicked people, murderers and such like, get to go to Olam Haba, the world to come? That doesn't seem fair. That doesn't seem to fit. So here's how that's resolved. It's resolved with the idea that there is something like purgatory or hell in different accounts where people work off their punishment and then they can get to go to Olam Haba. In the Mishnah, Rabbi Akiva said, Eduyot 2:10, there are five things, these are lists of numerical things, and he says there are five things that last for 12 months, a year. And one of those five things is the judgment, mishpat rishaim begehinom, the judgment of the wicked in Gehinom, which is conventionally translated as hell, although if you're fancy English, Gehenna. So they're judged for 12 months. Although Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says, no, only during the Omer, only from Pesach until Shavuos, only 50 days. Okay? So that means, according to this classical rabbinic theology, if you are wicked, you've done wicked things in this life, you will suffer something, doesn't say in this Mishnah yet, we haven't read yet what it is, in hell for 1 year, and then you go to Olam Haba, the world to come, except for those categories of people who we said are excluded. Okay? Here's a passage from the Babylonian Talmud Rosh Hashanah that everyone knows, right? Rabbi Krispedai says that Rabbi Yochanan says, on Rosh Hashanah, there are 3 books that are opened. The idea of God sitting as a judge with books are opened goes back to the prophet Daniel, and we talked about that around Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur time. We read that passage, and I think we read this passage also probably then, that classic rabbinic idea. 3 books. Those who are totally righteous are immediately inscribed on Rosh Hashanah for a good year of life. That is why we say only on the first night of Rosh Hashanah, Lishana Tovati Katevu V'Techatemu, may you be written and inscribed for a good year, because I'm doing you the compliment of saying that I know that you're a tzaddik, and I know that you will be signed and sealed and stamped, not really stamped, written and signed on day 1 of Rosh Hashanah for a good year, because I know that you're a tzaddik, right? Second day and the rest of, we say Gemar Chatima Tova, we hope you have a good signature. But the first day of Rosh Hashanah, we say to each other, L'shana tova tikatei v'tichatem, may you be inscribed right away, because I know you're a tzaddik. Okay? If I'm still wishing you anything on day 2, that means you might not be a tzaddik. So totally righteous people are inscribed immediately in the book of life. Okay? Wicked people are immediately written in the book of death. Middle people are pending from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, right? And then there's a passage later on that says, therefore, you should always see yourself as if you're 50-50, right? We know this theology very well, because we've all been to shul on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and heard enough rabbinic sermons and heard this enough times. You should always see yourself as 50-50, which means your next act is going to tip the balance, whether you're in Tzadikim or Rishayim, in the righteous or in the wicked. Okay. Book. I don't know why I gave. Beit Shammai says, and similarly, there are 3 categories of people on Judgment Day. Remember, Judgment Day, against your will, you will be resuscitated and judged after death, right? 3 categories. 1 category, totally righteous. 2nd category, totally wicked. And the 3rd, in-betweeners, right? Totally righteous. They are immediately sent off to Chaye Olam, eternal life. They go to Olam Haba. Totally wicked. They immediately get sent to Gehinom. Middle people, most of us, go down to Gehinom, and they kind of, what's it say here in English? They kind of go up and down, or down and up. They go down. Here we are. Middling people will descend to Gehenna to be cleansed and to achieve atonement for their sins, just like we read in the last passage, and they will cry out in their pain, and eventually they will ascend from there, right? So they're going to go down, they're going to suffer, they're working off, it's like a prison sentence, but painful, okay? and then they will come up from there. So Beit Shammai would agree with Kol Yisrael Yesh Lahem Chelek Le'olam Haba. All Jews have a share in the world to come. Some of them may need to go down to Gehinnom first to work off their sins. It's 8:44. I'm promising I'm going to wrap it up soon. Oh, and then we have various people about who's going to go down to sins. And it says, what about the Gentiles? And it says some of the Gentiles go down. Some of them are totally burned. Some souls are totally burned. Okay. And what is Gehinnom like? Now, I'm just going to give you a very small taste of it. Again, there are many, many descriptions involving all sorts of terrible tortures. You think of like Hieronymus Bosch, paintings about the tortures of hell. So the sages of the Talmud have lots of descriptions of the tortures of hell. I am not bringing them because it's just, too upsetting and baroque and bizarre. So I'm only going to bring just the taste of it. Another list of 5 things. 5 things that are 1/60th. Fire, honey, Shabbos, sleep, and dreams. Fire is 1/60th of Gehinnom. You burned yourself, that's a 60th of what Gehinnom is like. Meaning, in this simple description, Gehinnom is like fire, where we get the idea of the fires of hell, okay? Christians didn't make it up. By the way, honey is 1/60th of the taste of man, the manna. Shabbos is 1/60th of what the world to come is like. Sleep is 1/60th of death. And dreams is 1/60th of prophecy. Okay, so pause, stop. Might have been one other last. There was something about, hold on. Here it is. Yeah. So, this part of the previous passage. So the sinners of Israel, what about Gentiles? Are there righteous Gentiles? What happens to them? A lot of midrashic passages about that. Here it says the sinners of Israel are tormented in Gehinnom, just their bodies. Okay. The sinners of the other nations, sinners of Israel are tormented in Gehinnom for 12 months, just their bodies. Okay. The sinners of the Gentiles, among the Gentiles, they go down to Gehinnom for 12 months. And after 12 months, Gufan Kaleh, their body has been totally destroyed. Vinishmatan Nisrefet, sinners among the Gentiles. After their punishment in hell for 12 months, their soul has been totally consumed by fire. The ruach mefazratan tachat kapot raglei tzadikim. And the wind scatters, presumably those ashes, of their burnt souls under the feet of the righteous. Okay? But then there's certain wicked people who go down to Gehinnom, to hell, forever and ever. Gehinnom, hell may end, but their souls, I don't know how hell could end, but their souls being in hell wouldn't end. But there's some people who are so wicked, hell might freeze over. They're still going to be burning in hell. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing. And again, many of you may feel like, oh my God, this is, I don't believe this and it's irrelevant, But I just want to point out, this is in fact classic rabbinic theology, unquestioned, right? What's it about, right? Why does it exist? It exists to answer the question or problem, how come it seems that there are, in this world, we look around, we see there are bad things that happen to good people and bad people who seem to prosper. So the system of reward and punishment doesn't seem fair. One conclusion, and this is seen as a heresy elsewhere in the Talmud, one conclusion is to say, late deen v'late dayan. There is no judge and no judgment. Okay? Meaning people don't get rewarded and punished. Now, some of us might or might not believe that, but in classic rabbinic theology, that is seen as heresy. Okay? The other logical conclusion is to say that there is some realm that we do not get to see in our lives where all of these things, where the balance sheet does get reconciled fairly, where those who did good are rewarded, and the rabbinic midrashic imagination fills in what this reward is like at the world to come, where there is no human strife, we're like angels, or where we feast. By the way, there's other stuff, the righteous are eating at tables of gold, and the angels are the waiters, and they're more amplification of what Olam Haba, the world to come, Gan Eden, Garden of Eden, is like. And the wicked will get their punishment. Don't worry about it. And their punishment will be terrible, terrible, terrible. And then there are all kinds of, again, I just gave you a little taste of the rabbinic ideas about, hell is fiery and painful. But there's much, again, more extensive and bizarre descriptions of how fiery and painful it was. That if we read those, if we actually read them together, you might end up saying, like, I just don't want to be Jewish anymore. I'm sorry. I just can't, I can't accept that this is like a part of our tradition. So that's why I left it out. Wouldn't want to start the day that way. But I want to say, again, this is classic rabbinic theology, right? Reward and punishment has got to work. They've got to make it work. It obviously doesn't seem to work in this world if you look at this world. And therefore, there's got to be some other place. This is just the vestibule. This is just the prologue, all right, to the big event, all right? The real reality, which lasts forever, right? And here's what it's like. And this is the sages' way. Again, when I say the sages, I mean classic theology of Talmudic era. This is the sages' way of making it all fit. 8:51. I'm going to pause to see if there are any questions. Bernie, unmute, please.
Yeah, Avi, I wasn't saying that there's no medieval midrashic explanation, but
I wasn't calling you out. I was just responding to what you said they told you.
But there are very, very few people I know at a Jewish funeral that say they're better off. Whereas the Christian theology is in a better place. And I don't know a lot of people, either conservative or I don't know a lot of real Orthodox people, but, they believe that. It doesn't seem to me my friends we daven with believe that.
I got it.
Maybe I'm wrong.
All right. So I could ask the same question we asked last time, which is like, what percentage of Jews in the world do you think believe something like this? And I think the answer would be 20 to 40%, but I don't know. Larry, but 20 to 40%, which does not include, apparently, Bernie and his friends. He has now outed himself. Okay. All right. Out himself as a disbeliever in this aspect of Jewish theology. Larry.
Well, first of all, I'm proving that you can go from Eden to Gehenna since I'm coming from Eden Mortuary and I'm on the 405, which is the equivalent of Gehenna.
Okay.
But I do have a serious question about a tangential issue, which is this concept of shishim. And you mentioned 1 in 60th.
1/60th, meaning there's certain, the point of it, I didn't say the overall point of that passage is there are certain things that we experience in this life, which just gives us a little taste, described as 1/60th, of some other thing that we can't really imagine what it is from our experience.
Right.
Go ahead, Larry.
I understood that.
Yeah.
And, as you know, there's this also concept of Betel B'Shishim, that if you drop a drop of dairy into a meat pot, if it's accidental, it was a 60th, it doesn't make it treif. I'm just wondering where the a lot of numbers are special in Judaism.
Yeah.
And I hadn't thought about base 60 and why that was special.
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I think it is their way of saying what we might say in our English idiom would be something like a tiny percentage. I think it's their way of saying something like a tiny percentage.
Trivial,
right.
Sure.
A tiny percentage. And the opposite in English, we would say like 1,000-fold or 100-fold, right? Oh, this happened to you. You think this is bad? Well, it happened to me 100-fold, right? So they have their way of saying, I don't have a mathematical answer for you. Like, is this like, in Babylonia, it was the sexagesimal system with base 6 or I don't know the answer to that. I am sure someone has written an article about that. But I think that is their way of saying, by the way, and we know there's all kinds of percentages, right? There's, there are all kinds of laws that are about half and half or more than half or less than half. There are things that, are thirds. And I think this is their way of saying tiny taste.
Yeah, I understood. I just was wondering if there was an anthropological
I understand.
answer. Why we didn't use 40? Because 40 is also a very special number.
Correct.
A 40th.
Right. Don't know. Yep. Thanks. Good question.
Thank you.
All right. I don't know. Maybe something about Babylonian mathematics. Who knows? I don't know. Okay. Well then, I think this concludes our unit on rabbinic theology. And what I'm thinking of doing the next 2 weeks is 1 week of review of kind of everything we talked about in biblical and rabbinic. I think it would be good to sort of look back and pull it all together. And then I am thinking of doing a session on Akdamut, which is the Aramaic prayer we say on the first morning of Sukkot in synagogue before the Torah reading, because actually Akdamut is totally is a prayer. It's good timing, coincidental timing, which totally actually embodies and describes this rabbinic theology of reward and punishment and afterlife. That's what Akdamut is about. So we might take the opportunity to have a quick look through that prayer. So I'm thinking those are things we might do the next 2 weeks. And everyone stay healthy, be Torah, and God willing, we'll meet again next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.